Well, good morning, everybody. I hope everyone had a good evening in Dillon last night. We saw all of you all throughout the town, so I hope you spent your money wisely in Dillon. We're gonna dive right in this morning, and we're gonna kick off the day with the Budget Admin and Audit Committee. Regent Tuss is not with us this morning or this week, and so Regent Dombrowski has agreed to chair the committee. So the floor is yours, Joyce.
Thanks, Regent Lozar. I'll call your attention, please, to the consent agenda items before you. Consent items A through, I believe it's P. Are there any questions or concerns about any of these consent agenda items? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the action items and the facility items, and I'll turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Trevor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I believe Director Muffick will come up and talk about items A through H. So the bulk of these action items, they are all related to the University of Montana's recent bond refinance.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As Deputy Commissioner Trevor mentioned, we're going to take items A through, I believe it's H, as sort of a group here, and I will go through. I'll go through the items and provide some detail for each project. Items A through F are brought to us from the University of Montana, Missoula, and items G is from the University of Montana Western, and item H is from Montana Tech. As Deputy Commissioner Trevor mentioned, these are funded from proceeds from the recent bond refinancing. We'll start with item A here, which is a request for authorization to repair streets and sidewalks. Item A is for $1.25 million to repair cracks in campus streets, sidewalks, including the oval brick walkway, and it's addressing maintenance that's been deferred over the past few years. We'll be repairing cracks, heaving, and deterioration. We'll move on to item B if we could, Heather. Item B is a renovation of the corner store in the Lomason building. It's for $800,000, and it has renovations including a new kitchen with cooking and serving stations, a pizza oven, and new furnishings, fixtures, and lighting upgrades. Item C is structural repairs to Washington Grizzly Stadium for $1 million. The structural repairs include repairing and replacing concrete surfaces, repairing and painting deteriorated structural connections, a west access stair replacement with a handrail and guardrail repair and replacements, and some maintenance painting and crack sealing. Item D is some elevator projects, installing a new elevator in Washington Grizzly Stadium, which is replacing 2 existing elevators that are beyond repair. We'll provide ADA access to the west and north side of the stadium. In addition, there's an elevator in Knowles Hall that'll be modernized to meet code. This elevator is from 1960, and there are no parts available any longer. Total cost for these 2 elevator projects, $965,000. Moving on, item E. This provides for construction of a new parking and security facility on campus. Currently, the police station, the police force is housed with the facilities group. The total cost is $2.5 million. It'll be a 5,000 square foot structure. It'll house Police Parking and Emergency Operations Center, and this is replacing a severely water damaged rental property. Item F, the last University of Montana, Missoula item. It's upgrades and repairs to the Uri Underground Lecture Hall and the North Underground Lecture Hall. Total cost is $1.5 million. It'll provide new lighting, seating, carpet, paint, and teaching technology upgrades. Uri Hall is the largest lecture hall on campus, seats 440 students, so it'll be an upgrade. Item G is a request for approval to remodel Matthews Hall. From Western. Matthews Hall is used for student housing, dining operations, conferences, and events. Was able to tour that this week with Cole Cottom, their facilities director. The work is something that is very, very needed. I'll say that the windows are the originals from when the building was built. It's going to replace all the original windows. It's going to update the east wing restrooms, which were not included in the previous upgrade a few years ago. It's going to upgrade the lighting and the heating controls, make the building much more efficient, and the total cost of this project is $1 million. And then finally, the item H is from Montana Tech and authorizes renovating space in the Science and Engineering Building for a new nursing simulation lab. The simulation center will occupy about 4,700 square feet on the north side of the first floor. The center will consist of 4 patient rooms, 4 debriefing rooms, and a centralized control room. Space is currently vacant and was previously used for multiple labs by the general engineering. So that wraps up all of these items. Of note, no additional operation and maintenance liabilities will occur because of these projects, at least for the state, and I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions from the board?
So under item H, the Matthews Hall renovation, oh, is that H? Oh, G. Here it requests a total amount of $100,000. I think it's just missing a 0. So if we can just clarify, that's for the amount of $1 million.
Yeah. Yeah. Just 1 0 is missing.
Just 1 0. So
What kind of comma is it?
that's not an Oxford comma.
Yeah, we'll get that fixed.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, just to confirm, so A through F, all the University of Montana action items in front of us are funded through the proceeds from the recent bond issue. Is that correct? A through H. Each one.
Madam Chair, Regent, those are all of the items, including the tech and Western items, because the funds are
And
for
affiliated
all
campuses.
affiliates as well.
Perfect. Okay.
Madam Chair, that's consistent with previous bond practice is, yeah, the affiliate campuses bond together. So some of those proceeds are being used by the affiliate campuses, and that's consistent really on how we've done it across the system.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Aye.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, keeping within the same topic category, I call Vice President Least from Montana State University to the podium to talk about item I, which is a request to authorize a refinancing of MSU bonds.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As you're aware, interest rate's extremely low right now, and we'd like to take advantage of that with some debt service that we had previously issued. So this item requests your adoption of the resolution, or a resolution, to issue facilities revenue refunding bonds for MSU and authorize us to work with Commissioner Christian to proceed with the issuance of these bonds. No new debt is being requested here, so again, extremely favorable markets, and we'd like to take advantage of these at this time. Stand for any questions.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Madam Chair.
Please.
Just with the reissuing of these bonds, is there any defined strategy in terms of a use at this point in time?
Yeah, so we have existing debt on residence halls. In recent years, we've done residence halls, we've upgraded and built new dining halls, things like that. So these are refunding the debt that we already have, just bringing that interest rate down. So it's, we're looking at probably 1.5, 2 percentage points lower at this time based on what we have. So it'll take probably 6 to 8 weeks for us to be able to hit the market, but yeah.
Board, any other questions? All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Now we'll move to information.
Madam Chair, I just had
Please.
maybe one comment for University of Montana. I know when we had the conversation around the restructuring of debt within University of Montana and that side of the system. Obviously, it was it was a good strategy for the university, and I think we posed the question, so what is the plan when we do a new bond issuance? And this was maybe in the middle of the summer last year, and your new VP of Finance said, we don't know exactly what it's going to be, but we're building out our strategy. And I just wanted to note that it's obvious you guys have been working very hard and prioritizing and strategizing what the best use of funds will be, and very excited to see these new updates to, particularly to University of Montana campus and the other 2 campuses on your side.
Thank you. We'll move on to information.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'll start with item A, which is the FY21 performance funding allocations. This would be the 6th year under this model, the performance funding model, that we've allocated funds. And so we measure our metrics and we allocate for the upcoming fiscal year. And that's what you see here. And sometimes that occurs in May and sometimes in March. Usually the March one is in the off board meeting from the legislative session. And so that's where we're at. I thought I'd first visit and revisit the goal statement related to performance funding, which has not changed. And it's a 3-part statement. And the first one is to increase degree production, and do that in the name of a statewide effort to grow the number of residents in our population with a higher education credential. We've heard the governor talk about this, certainly have heard past presidents talk about this, and this is performance funding is one of our key strategies to get to these increases. Number 2 is to focus on output as well as input. And I've had other presentations where I've talked about, I believe since 1972 through 2015, we solely relied upon input, and that was enrollment. And this gives us a avenue to focus on something besides enrollment, and that connects with the item 3, which is pay for what we value. And the hallmark of our performance funding model is a combination of retention and completions. I can walk through those metrics as well, but I thought I'd just cut straight to the allocation amounts. This is the annual spreadsheet related to the dollars that we distribute. Just as a reminder that campuses are aligned by what is your campus share of resident student FTE. For instance, at MSU, it's 35.5%. Well, then, of the $15 million we set aside for performance funding, MSU Bozeman would then be eligible for 35.5% of that $15 million. And as you can see from this schedule here, that they were eligible for that and they received 100% of it, and so on and so forth for each campus. And we highlight the campuses being MSU Billings and Highlands College, who did not receive the totality of their enrollment, their performance funding. A couple more slides here. I'm always prepared to walk through each campus outcomes, and I just sort of wanted to engage the board, in which I believe is a discussion that we annually have related to performance funding, and remind us that we recently made some changes, some improvements to the model. In the May meeting last year, we adopted the measurement of the underrepresented at-risk groups. So that's your veterans, your low-income students, your American Indians, and non-traditional students. Prior to this year, we used those categories. We would measure retention and completion for those categories, but they would be add-on bonus points. This would be the first year where we integrated those metrics into the model, and now they are weighted each at 5% with retention and then completions awarded within those categories to round out the totality of the metrics. For those that are new to the model, the common theme here is that completions and retention are measured for everyone, and then based upon institutional mission, we have metrics that are slightly and vary between campus categories. One more topic before we get into the actual outcomes for each campus. This board has indicated in the past in various planning sessions that retention is a top goal, and asked me to find ways to at least explore how we might emphasize that notion within our performance funding model. And so I bring just three very generic ideas. And one of them would be the fact that we have weights and all of the metrics are weighted. It gives the opportunity for the board to change those weights and move weights to areas that you want to emphasize. Another topic that has been brought up numerous times is, what are the targets? We're asked that question. What is the target retention rate for institutions within a specific type of mission category? We could explore mechanisms that might emphasize those targets. And then finally, just another variation of looking at this, we could increase or dedicate a specific amount of performance dollars to a topic like retention. And we could, very simply, we could run the model twice, and you could have just lower, bifurcated models, one just on retention and one on the totality of all of the metrics. So just some ideas there to wrestle with. I could pause and we could talk about those, or I can go campus by campus through every metric. This is some things we've done in the past. Or I could slowly scroll like this. And you can look really quickly. But I'd be glad to highlight anything and talk about any component of performance funding. It's literally one of the primary topics at our office, my unit here at Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education thinks about and works on. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there questions? And I am looking at Chair Lozar. I thought you, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe a couple comments or suggestions. So I think it is helpful having the opportunity to review each of the outcomes for all the campuses. That's helpful to maybe be able to see some trends within each campus and just kind of see where the performance is within each of the categories. I would be interested just being a system board, seeing if there's a way to maybe combine some of the outcomes of at least, maybe it's the 4 years, the flagships, and the 2 years, to see at a system level how we are doing collectively. So I think that would be a suggestion as we're looking at opportunities to improve this tool, or at least the reporting.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, certainly we have the capability of that, and I'm fairly positive we have a dashboard behind this that shows you all the metrics kind of dynamically across 7-year, 8-year period of time. So we can group that, and would be happy to do so and report back on those. You bet.
Thank you. Any other questions? Regent Sheehy.
I love all the data, as you know. I think as to changing the system, we run a risk in tinkering with things that we just keep changing the goalposts a little bit. So I'm not necessarily in favor of changing it. I think this is the system we have. That being said, I again voice my real concerns about this, and that is that we are punishing the wrong people with the withholding of funds. Especially with respect to MSU Billings, I think that it's our failure to retain leadership at that institution for longer than a cycle that has caused a lot of these problems, and the administrator now in place is saddled with the results of that. So I just think we can't talk about performance funding without talking about that problem with the system. So I raise that as not I understand we have performance funding. I voted for it when it came in. I don't see any way to tinker with it where we somehow get to take money out of the administrators who leave the job too soon or don't get the job done. So we wind up taking the money out of their budgets, which is really student money. So I have a problem with it.
Thank you. Chair Lozar?
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Commissioner, would you just, for the crowd and for all of us, remind us the legislative intent behind performance funding and how this all started and why we're here today? I think it's really helpful.
You bet. Madam Chair, Regent Miller, you know, I wouldn't start with the legislature on the intent of performance funding. This is definitely something that the Board of Regents adopted in partnership with the legislature. Yesterday we talked about shared policy goals, and one of them related to career and technical education in the recent legislative session. Performance funding came about very much in that same vein. Legislators were looking to us during the session for some kind of mechanism to measure the effectiveness of the university system, and for us to kind of to show some accountability, and that we had tools in place to incentivize campuses through our financing model. And performance funding was the fit for that. We followed national best practices across the nation through Complete College America. In fact, there was a bill in the legislative session in 2013 that adopted the Complete College America metrics. And we use those metrics in a system-wide effort, and you see them here in our model, through what was probably a 3-year process to get to this model where we're at. We started small and grew it and had large participation throughout the university system. In fact, that was some of the hallmark of what we did, was to include faculty. And I believe some of them, or at least I don't see Provost Makwa here, but he was an instrumental player in not only working on the details of the model, but communicating the attributes of the model, particularly back to the faculty groups. So that's a little bit more than what you asked for there, but the heart of what it is from the legislative lens is certainly accountability and an ability to tie and be connected, for them to feel connected in one manner of those funds that they give to us in a lump that might drive some of the outcomes that they hope to see.
And one follow-up question. This is funding that is given above and beyond the funding already designated to the universities. So in essence, it shouldn't already be in their budget.
Madam Chair, Regent Miller, that is exactly right. Now, has that been adopted in practice or theory? It varies by campus, for sure. But campuses have grown, or maybe how we originally adopted it at times as part of the base. So when they fill a reduction of the extra performance funding, they can, and it's real, they can fill a reduction in the part of their base. When we started this, if we, hindsight being 2020, we would have done a better job of allocating the base, and then probably 6 months later coming back with the performance funding allocations to make it crystal clear that these are two separate pots of money. They were blended initially, and that was that's on me. But we're crystal clear in the fact that they are not.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Chair Lozar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think to Regent Sheehy's comment around sort of penalizing some of the campuses that have not I sort of earned the tranche of money that they have access to. I know over the last 3 cycles, we've had a pool of dollars that have not been fully tapped, and we've had a different strategy over the past 3 cycles for how we use those funds. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about that history, and then kind of looking at the outcomes of this year, of the total 15 million, it looks like we're $518,000 that are that we're short. Maybe talk about some of the ideas that OCHI has come up with for use of funds for those.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, so the residual funds, that's what we call them inside the model, and that's the leftover funds that didn't find a place. And I will make this comment. In the first version of the model, we ran them back through the model and gave them to campuses that improved. The problem with that is that then we had campuses competing against each other. And that's one of the key components of our model, is that campuses compete against themselves, period. And if they don't get the money, then the money goes into the residual pot. And we then look to board direction, commissioner direction, and finally, if those funds aren't allocated by the end of the biennium, we can move those into the next biennial allocation of financial aid, need-based aid. So that's the broad model of what we do with it. Now, what we've specifically done with those funds over time has varied, and it varies by year. So I'm going to go back a couple years here. Initially, we had a component within the performance funding model that campuses could earn back those funds in the second year of the biennium. And we used that. And one time, MSUB earned back $750,000, the totality of what they lost in the first year. We are also ultra sensitive to the perception that this model is nothing more than kind of a movement of funds back and forth to a campus, and we want to stay away from that. And so this board decided to remove that component from the definitions or the methodologies that we have, and just stick with a grant back. So we have a provision where we can grant back dollars to campuses, and campuses over in various times that have lost funds have submitted to us for a portion of the amount that they've lost, ideas, and we've funded those ideas specific to the campus. And now we've kind of evolved into the next step, which is Project 10, a system-wide effort for retention. And in fact, that's exactly what we're doing with the residual amounts in FY 20, the FY 20 model, not this model. We're using those funds to support the initiation of Project 10. And then we look to the residual funds for FY 21. And right now, it appears that we would use those to backfill 1-2 free. 3 years ago, we also used some of the funds to backfill an increase, and so that's spread across all campuses, an increase in our pay plan in a legislative year where we did not receive favorable funding.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe kind of moving on to just the tweaking of the metrics that we have. So we've had performance funding for, what is it, 8 years?
6 on this model.
Six years, and have gone through at least three tweaks that I'm aware of, in terms of percentages and then the indexing. And I think that, personally, I think that is that's a healthy thing to do, is to really connect performance funding with paying for what we value. And I think that's driven sort of the changes that we've made. That certainly drove the changes around the additional weight, so removing of the bonuses for underrepresented and at-risk populations. And this is our first time seeing that, and that is something that this board talked about, and that's something that I think was of value to this board. And I think one of the, kind of going back to that particular tweak, one of the conversations that we discussed at this table, and I'm pretty sure was discussed quite a bit at the campuses, is if you're going to tweak this model, it's not necessarily fair to the campuses to tweak it and turn it around immediately. There has to be some time for some shifts and some strategies, some rethinking, to set each of the campuses up for success. So I think this is I think it's healthy to make adjustments in the areas in which we value, and I think it needs to be done in a way that's fair, that allows for some adaptability, some agility at the campus level to make whatever shifts and changes they need to make to be able to access the full balance of their campus's funding. So I think I differ, in my opinion, than Regent Sheehy. Kind of going back to, why, the primary reason we're in this business is student success. And I think, really looking at our model and looking at one of the primary drivers is retention rates. I think that's a good, retention rates and completion is really why we're in this business. And I would love to hear from other board members, kind of what has been teed up and what we started conversations in our planning meetings on what is the role of adding additional value around retention rates to this model, to performance funding. And I'd also like to hear thoughts, and maybe it's something that I've been pushing for several years, this idea of what are those targets? I mean, my understanding of that the campuses do have their own targets that they're reaching for retention rates. It always baffles me that we don't necessarily know at the system level, or at least we don't have a way to showcase what those targets are, just to see where each of the campuses are in terms of what they're striving to for retention rates. So I know that's quite a bit right there, but I think we need to have a robust conversation, and I think the time is now to have that conversation, because if we're going to make some tweaks, we want to be able to give campuses the opportunity to weigh in, and then some time for the tweaks to be digested and plans to be made. So with that, I'd love to hear from fellow board members.
Regent Nystuen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm concerned that we're venturing into something that needs fixing, but it's not broken. I'm very supportive all along with performance funding. I've appreciated the adjustments that we've made. I'm not sure, from my viewpoint, that we need to change much. I think Deputy Commissioner Trevor and Commissioner Christian and their staff have done a great job in articulating this, not just here at Regents meetings, but with our legislative colleagues and so forth. And I think it really should be a call to action on the campuses to say we know what our priorities are. They're listed right there before us, and be thinking broadly and as to how do we attract and retain and graduate more students. And so I guess, Casey, I think we're okay right now. I'm wide open to other suggestions from others around the table and certainly from the campuses, but I like what we have. Thanks.
Thank you, Regent Nystuen. Regent Rogers?
Yeah, I'll echo Regent Nystuen's comments. I think I've heard from every campus leader that they don't like the formula, which makes me sort of feel like it spreads out the pain, essentially, which is tough. And I appreciate that we need to constantly be looking at this and making sure that there aren't things that we're blatantly missing and needing to fix. I do like the concepts that Deputy Commissioner Trevor's mentioned here for the different potential retention-focused options. I don't feel like I personally have enough information to say which one of these we should do. I would be interested in what the campuses think. I would be interested in what other states are doing and what has really driven success and driven retention rates going up. I like the concept of incentivizing it, because hopefully then that money goes back into further retention efforts. But again, I think performance funding is tough. I think that we've struck somewhat of a balance, and agree with Regent Nystuen. I don't want to fix something that isn't broken necessarily.
Thank you. Any other comments? I do have a sort of a question, and directed maybe at your comment, Chair Lozar. I want to see targets also. I feel like it's difficult to know exactly. I appreciate comparing yourself to yourself, but even with that, there are targets and measures of success that I guess, and perhaps they're out there and I'm not aware of them, But when I look at these options, for me to be more transparent and agreed on targets for each institution, I think may be helpful. But I'm certainly looking to your question or the staff's expertise in terms of how to tweak something, not too much that isn't broken, but yet to create a degree of transparency around those metrics.
Would it be helpful to have any of maybe the presidents at the table to talk about specific targets and how they come up with those targets, and whether it'd be helpful or not to have those identified, at least the ranges identified for the board?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for your question. At Montana State University, we have identified those targets as part of our strategic planning process. So this is a process that we undertake every 7 years. And what we have done is try to do two things. We want to have targets that are a stretch and are aspirational for us. So that's how we have determined that. I think it's important to underline that if we're going to move in this direction, some measure of validating those targets will be important, so that in reality, every institution is really stretching and not coming out because now the board is going to have this as part of their criteria, something that is easily attainable. I will be out of order, but I will just say something different from the question that has been asked. And I have painfully realized the perfect funding formula does not exist.
Thank you, President Cruzado.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd echo my colleague, President Cruzado's comments, and that we also have set targets on our campus. We have set ambitious targets on our campus and have really focused on, we focused in on that first-time, full-time cohort. This measure here encompasses part-time as well as transfers, which is slightly different. That first-time, full-time, focus does matter, right? We set an 80% goal for first-time, full-time, which is very aggressive. We saw a 3% increase in that over this past year. So I think targets can be helpful. I would offer a couple of perhaps thoughts and cautions as we think about that. Number one is that different institutions have different incoming classes, different characteristics of students. And so as we think about targets, that obviously needs to be taken into account. The other thing about targets is you can increase your retention rate through improvements in serving your students, or you can increase your retention rate by changing the types of students that you bring into your institution. We should be very cautious that we do not at all incentivize the latter, because you can do that and even remaining open access, who we recruit, how we offer financial aid, how we think about scholarships. You can have, for an entering class, kind of an expected retention rate for that class, which could be at the University of Montana, different from the class before. And we can look at those metrics, and we frankly know when we have a higher risk class or a lower risk class. I really don't want us to be in a place where we are changing how we look at incoming students because we're trying to hit our retention numbers. So if there are targets, I think that target should be, and there are ways to look at a cohort of a class and look at, a profile of that class and what should be the expected retention rate of that class based on scores, financial status, all those risk factors we know that impact retention. So if we're going to look at targets, I really think it should be a true value add for the institution by saying, look at what you're taking in, and then what you would expect the retention rate to be and how you've performed relative to that, which gets complicated. But if we're going to go that route, I think it's important to really take a data-driven approach that ensures that we're truly improving how we serve students rather than choosing students that are more likely to be successful.
Thank you, President Bodnar. Great comments. Any other questions? Regent Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one quick question. Can we go down to the Highlands College slide? And this is for the Deputy Commissioner. So we're looking at the percentage eligible funding at 77%, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And when we're talking about this formula, it's really difficult to get to that 77% from the numbers presented on the screen. So can you just walk us through the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division that you did to get to 77%?
Madam Chair, Regent Miller, absolutely. And it's not going to be overly transparent completely from this slide. So let's just start with degrees awarded. And let's use this line as our example. Their 3-year average in degrees awarded, so the past 3 years, the average has been 143 degrees and certificates awarded. This current year, they awarded 110. That was a 23% decrease. So the index score here would be 1,000 for every one of these metrics. And so we reduced that index score by the multiplication of 23% off of 1,000, and then you multiply that 769 by the weight, which is the 30%, to get to this weighted score of 231. And then we do that for every one of these metrics. And so we set, if you end up then at a perfectly level area, you would have 1,000 points in this total. But in this case, when we total them up, you're at 951. And our model has set a target of a 1% increase per year. So we're looking for campuses to come in at 1,010. And then this line right here is the part that when I said a little less than transparent on this slide, is that instead of the fact of not hitting 1,010, and if you showed up at 1,009, we don't take all of your money away. In fact, we incrementally back it off based upon 2 standard deviations. And so it's of your prior 5 years worth of data to come up with what is a transition zone. And the bottom of that zone is 757. So so for this campus, which is different than other campuses because transition zones are different sizes, they would have to get all the way down to 756 before they got $0. And so this ends up being 77% of the eligible amount based upon that 951 in relationship to their 1,010. Nobody ever, okay, we try to keep this simple, and it was one of our primary goals when we created this model was keep it simple. But very smart people tend to make things complicated. Mine would have been really simple. It would have been just A plus B type thing, but it got complicated.
I'm no math major, but I was able to follow that pretty well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Regent Sheehy.
Would I be correct in assuming that if we went with these target rates, going back to that other screen with the 3 options on it, the target rates, it would be valid for each campus to have different target rates based not just on each year's class, but on the focus and the type of service? So wouldn't that be much more complicated of a measurement? So the way I understand it, what we measure now is we measure off last year's performance.
Prior
And
year.
then we look for improvements or decreases from an actual figure. So wouldn't the target rates be kind of grading off of an estimate?
Madam Chair, Regent Sheehy, I do think it would add another layer of complexity to the model. I'm not positive how the targets would integrate to the model. I think we would have to take a step back and look at the formula functioning of how we want to do it. It could be as simple as for each campus, we could put big numbers down here that related back to their performance that are the targets. And just so you have a benchmark, but not drive changes in the formula. Or you could go to the degree to which you actually wanted to open up the formula portion of this and figure out how to integrate those targets. So two sides to it. The target, I think
Could
the
be
value of the
informational.
target for you is you just don't understand what is good improvement. If the improvement we're measuring is only over what you've done over the last 3 years. In some cases, it is a really good metric. And I'll show you the one that is really a good metric here. Take a look at the billings increase in retention. Their 3-year average is 59. Their current level is 64. I don't need a benchmark to tell me that they did good. Now, what's the ceiling on what they should be headed towards? That's a different question. And we can do that in a variety of ways. We, peer groups are, probably based upon common institutional missions. Now, Senator, geez, I don't know where that came from. President Bodnar. He was looking very senatorial when I looked at him.
He's got until Monday.
That's gonna throw me. Explained a situation where you could get much more in detail, and at the system level, we're not going to be able to get down to what was the incoming class's ACT score and their, the predictive analytics related to the profile of the students that come in. That's the level that the campuses are at. So I think it's as with anything, we're digging into a layer on performance funding here, where our commitment to the campuses has been, when we explore the internal workings of the model, we include them. We've made some changes where we've just administratively done it because it made sense. This one, if we were going to do more than just put the benchmark up there and just kind of look at it, I think we want to go back to the campuses and ask them, we got to develop the targets. And I don't know what group of people are the best at doing this. I know which ones aren't, and I'm positive it's not the admin and finance people. This is probably not the crew that's going to give you the good benchmarks. Because me, I'll just go 80, 75, 70 for the 3 categories. And it'll be done. Round numbers, and it got over by the time the meeting was over. But that's not probably what's the most practical approach.
Tyler, to the extent that you're looking for feedback, my feedback is, I don't think you need to change it. I think your carrot, the only problem I have is with the stick. I don't have a problem with the carrot. I think this is working exactly the way we designed it. I think you've established the metrics and stuck to them. I think you've done the tweaking along the way. So I don't have any problem with how it's being done. I just wanted to raise this concern about the flip side, about the stick, as opposed to the carrot. And with respect to your 3 options, my feedback is, I think you've done your work here. And I know you have to keep working on it, but I don't see any need to go to this target thing.
Madam Chair, I would add on, not add on, but kind of bolster that statement with, when we've had targets before, and we've had the strategic plan with targets, and we've had them by campus, and then we've had them by peer group, and then you refresh them, and they continue to need to be refreshed. That's one issue with targets. The other one is, what I find more valuable is longitudinal data. Give me 10 years worth of data, and let me look at the trend. Now, we could put MSU Billings, for instance, into a bucket of predominantly 4-year baccalaureate degree campus, mid to small range in the West, and I can give you 25 peers of them right now, and I can give you the average retention rate. And that's valuable information. Then we know kind of what would be the average campus that looks like that, based upon very broad categories. To give you an air, like in your mind. That's why I quickly go flagships 80, and then I go to the, maybe it's 70 for the smaller 4-year campuses, and then 2-year campuses, it's, that's more like in the 60 zone. But I just know that from over time of doing these peer group measurements. Possibly that's where the board's at, just wanting some kind of backdrop framework to compare, is this a good retention rate? Or do you actually want to hold people accountable for reaching targets? Those are the two sides of this.
Thank you. Chair Lozar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for entertaining my comments. This has been a good conversation. I don't like the font that we're using here. So that's one tweak that we need to change.
It's from two.
So this has been a good conversation. And it seems like we're comfortable with sort of the layout that we have right now. And I just want to maybe separate the conversation around performance-based funding and the stick and the retention targets. So I think President Bodnar brought up a couple really important things about retention rates and ensuring that they're aligned with the profile of the incoming class, and I think that's important because we don't want to have any unintended consequences of recruiting just a class of students in the state. And I don't think we need to, at least at this point in time, I don't think we need to get to that level of complexity to set retention targets for every class, and I think that would be probably too much. So maybe separate from performance funding this conversation, I think it would be great to see what those aspirational targets are and just have those for the board to look at to see where the campuses are. Maybe we look at them when we see the performance funding every year, but just to kind of get the sense, as you mentioned, Tyler, sort of where they're at in their goals and their hopes to increase those, because I think that's what ultimately we're trying to do. So those are, maybe that's the one takeaway for me is let's see if we can, as a system, collect what those aspirational targets are and have those listed as we do with some other benchmarks that we have when we're looking at our some of our financial ratios and student-to-faculty ratios, et cetera.
Thank you, Chair Lozar. Commissioner?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I think this has been incredibly helpful. I think it gives us some direction, some takeaway. You know, I would like to, before we leave this topic, say congratulations to a whole lot of institutions that did receive 100% of their funding, and in particular, I want to say congratulations to Billings, where we have leadership that takes this serious and is working hard, and they've made some incredible strides in 1 year, and I think it's impressive. And I mean, I do have to say, and I've been part of this conversation for a long time now, whether it's a tool, a stick, a carrot, all those things, it does bring to this table a conversation that I think is important. And I think that goes back more than a decade of my involvement at this table of boards in the past really saying, like, where are we felt in this process? We go through a lot of work, we go through a lot of paperwork, we see a lot of things come and go. Even from motions from board members saying, should we take 10% off the top of the budget to work on things that matter to the board? And I think those things are really challenging, that the board then starts kind of managing in that. But performance funding, it's created a conversation around retention, something that's incredibly important to this board. I bumped into a faculty at the beginning of this week that said, man, all that president can talk about is retention. And we're starting to really feel it at a faculty level. And I think that's been the intent, right? And so that's good, because I think there's always been this question of how does conversations at the board, how does that affect campuses? How you know, and you all represent constituents across the state of Montana, including taxpayers, community members, people that care about higher education. How's it felt? And I think that it's give us a way to do that, and I think it's also give leadership at the campuses a way to say, these are things that are important to the board, they're things that need to be important to us, they're things we need to work on. Now, I would say also, you have some incredible campuses across the MUS that have been working hard on retention, and they have been working hard on completion, and they care about student success, they care about dual enrollment. Many of these things, yeah, we could also argue would have happened on their own, but it does have a way of bringing important things in the MUS to a table like this to be discussed, and I think that's been one of the great outcomes of performance funding. I agree. Agree with Regent Rogers. I often joke, but not really, that when nobody likes the budget, we're getting kind of close, and there's probably some truth to that and some truth to it around performance funding. Everybody has a little different take, but we did make a conscious effort, and we had a lot of these discussions early on that we don't want to move anything too fast. We don't want to change anything too radical. Otherwise, you know, every 2 years we're changing the target, and board members have a voice in that, but it makes it very challenging for campuses to really methodically sort of work through the process of how we get there. I think the takeaways for us, which are very positive, and we can make some early steps, is let's come up with some aggregated data, and we'll do that so you see how we are as a system. Let's get some of the campus targets just brought to the forefront. They exist, and you can see how we're doing in relationship to those targets. And then we'll work with our campus partners a little bit through other means to really try to shape how do our targets relate to what's best practice around the country, and what other institutions of our similar scopes and sizes. Maybe that's the 4 buckets that we talk about our institutions in or whatever, but how do we get to a spot where we have something to compare ourselves to? And I know the campuses do that, so they'll be able to provide a lot of feedback on that front as well. But we could bring, I think, some more colorful information to this discussion to really help continue that good, positive region table discussion around all these items which we've identified as important as board members. And then we can see, if we watch those for a while and we decide they needed to be embedded down the way, we can think about that. Or if we want to change weights, we can think about that. But I think trying to bring some just to the discussion is a good starting point. We got some good takeaways from this.
Excellent summary. Thank you. There's no more questions. We'll move along to agenda, information item B, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is a real quick, I guess, update on where we're at with the preparation for what sounds crazy, the 2023 biennial budget. Just some of the kind of nomenclature of state budgeting. So we used that last year of the biennium to describe the totality of a 2-year cycle, which would end in 2023. So that's why we call it the 2023 biennial budget that we're planning for. In May, we'll bring some recommendations to this committee and to the full board on how we proceed forward with our budget, which we ask the executive and we work in partnership with, we negotiate with, to include our recommended dollars in their budget, in the governor's budget, and that'll not only include funding for our base, but funding for what are the 2 primary drivers of a base plus budget that we have, which are present law adjustments, and I'll talk on the next page real briefly about those, and the pay plan. You'll also then consider new proposals, as well as I then mix in here what are some of the influencing factors of our budget. I just don't want to lose track of the fact that we strive to connect those state appropriations with our tuition revenue, which is obviously very much connected with our enrollment mix, the changes in enrollment, and we're keeping a close eye on that and how that all culminates in the totality of our budget. The next item that we'll talk about, the long-range building LRBP process, is also on that same trajectory of we're giving you an update at this meeting, and then we're going to ask for approval of our recommendations in May. So we have a timeline here that gets you from the May meeting where we get approval, and then June we submit our present law and our new proposals to the Office of Budget and Planning. That's the governor, that's the budget director for the executive. The governor's budget will be released in November, about the same time as our board meeting, sometimes simultaneously with the board meeting. I believe the last one we had in November in Missoula, sometimes after and sometimes before. So we'll spend some time at that board meeting, nevertheless, talking about the budget, which will be very close to being presented to the legislature at that point in time, which is obviously January, which brings us to May of next year, when we bring the results from the legislature and we meet to mesh those with what we would see the 2 sides of our current unrestricted budget, the state appropriations and our tuition revenue. Just a quick note on present law, because it's used often and often not defined. And so the definition straight from statute is the level of funding needed under present law, so decisions made by the legislature, to maintain operations and services at the level authorized by the previous legislature. So I still, after I read that sometimes, I'm still a little foggy. All right, no, give me an example of that. Well, so we've created these categories, right now, our office is working with the campuses on a campus-by-campus basis, not just with the campuses, but also the agencies, to come up with what the present law amounts are. And so going into the details of the budget and identifying those areas that have increases based upon that definition, and then doing it consistently across the campus, and then unveiling those results to the governor's office, and hope that they agree and include those. Of course, there's statewide budgeting parameters that we're following. Higher ed's a little different than other state agencies, so it makes it a little bit trickier. But these categories are kind of created to make this easier to understand. And so the first one's the easiest one to understand. We increase pay in one biennium. We have to continue with those increases going forward in the next biennium. That's the annualization of the pay plan. It creates a big chunk of our present law. I will show you those dollar amounts in detail, rolled up as a system in May. Then we have the other personnel costs. So health insurance, employee leave payouts. That's different for higher ed. We have to actually specify those in our present law. Also, items related to faculty promotion and merit. We then have items that are very much in common with the rest of other state agencies, and those are calculated centrally by the Department of Administration. The statewide agency operating elements, are insurance and tort payments, audit, ITSD costs that we are connected to. And then the fourth category, which are unique to higher ed, but very important to us, and have national kind of like indexes, which we use to identify pretty consistent increases that they're a fact of life. IT maintenance would be one of them. Journals are a very big deal. But safety and compliance and rent, and so that's all compiled in here. And then a category that kind of sits out on its own is that when we are approved for new space, and if the legislature agrees to appropriate O&M in the next session, those building projects are identified, and through a formula, a portion of the operation and maintenance comes to us, and we allocate those directly to the campus that had those projects. So just to round this out, just to give an example in round numbers, last session was based upon a tuition freeze, so our present law was more of a negotiated number to get to a tuition freeze to backfill a certain amount of lost tuition revenue. So I'm just giving you this as an example of how this looks. So in FY20, about $16 million over the FY19 base, and then you take 41% of that, because that's the portion of our current unrestricted that the state pays for. The other portion, tuition revenue, it equals $7 million. So we'd have a $7 million request for FY20. Then you'd go to FY21, and you look at it again over your base. So you look back to FY19, and you say, okay, we needed to replace that 16, but then there's some other additional extra costs there. So it increases in the second year of the biennium, and you do the same math, and lo and behold, we have about a $16 million total present law request. That'll be kind of the level of information with, of course, more detail. I mean, we can go down to the campus level on it when we come back in May, but I'll try to stay away from that and kind of keep it at the system level. So, Madam Chair, that's that item.
Thank you. Questions? Comments? That was very helpful. Thank you. Let's move on to information C.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm going to turn this over to Director Muffick to walk us through what, again, are a draft recommendations for our long-range building program. And again, you'll be asked to approve this list at the May Board of Regents meeting.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, as Deputy Commissioner Trevor set the stage here, this is a draft list and will be brought to you in May for action. Just a reminder, LRBP is the mechanism for state funding of capital development and major repairs for state buildings. We'll start working on this project as soon as one legislative session is complete. You have the list up in front of you here. I'll give you kind of a brief description of how we got to this list, and then I'll go through the capital development items with a little bit more detail. So our list is made up of 3 categories: the capital development category, the new category called major repairs, and our authority-only projects are at the bottom. Again, the authority-only projects do not require an appropriation from the state. Our projects total over $250 million, with $180 million of that coming from funding requests and $70 million in authority-only requests. This list is a culmination of work that begins, as I mentioned, right after every legislative session. It includes a number of people from across the system, including the campus planners, facility staff, administrators, commissioners, office staff, the commissioner himself, and the presidents as well. So all those groups participate in the process. We have 3 attachments related to this item, which include the main list, which you're seeing right now, and then the detailed descriptions of the capital development projects, which I'll go through. It will provide a little bit more information on each of the 9 priorities that we've identified. Then we also have 2 attachments, one from the MSU side of the system and one from the U of M side, that prioritize our major repair projects. As I mentioned at the November meeting, the major repairs is a different process than we've done in the past. We're going to have to prioritize our maintenance projects. Previously, we would receive a lump sum from the legislature. Now it's going to be, any funding is going to be tied to specific projects, so we had to get into much more detail, hence the attachments that we have here. We cut them off at about 35 projects per side of the system. That just kind of turned out to be a similar dollar amount to the amounts that we've submitted to the legislature in the past, which is about $56 million. So if you look at the major repair item here, we'll go over to the far right under MUS. It's $56,354,000 to be exact. And like I say, that's been in line with what we've provided to the legislature in the past few sessions. So we'll review the information here at this meeting. You'll vote on the final list in May. Then that list is submitted to the Architecture and Engineering Division within the Department of Administration. We'll continue to work with A&E and the executive branch to include our priorities and the statewide priorities going into the legislative session. I believe this list is very well done. I think it's probably the most vetted list of projects that I've worked on over the years. A lot of that's due to the legislative changes that were brought forth from House Bill 553, which I detailed to you in the November meeting, some significant changes to the LRBP process. And in addition to that, we've got a much more developed relationship between OCHE and the Architecture and Engineering Division, and between OCHE and our campus facility experts. So with that, I think I'll just go through the long-range building program project descriptions for the capital development, and we can stay on this page, Heather, that's okay. And I'll just talk about, as we go through, encourage you, if you have any questions, Madam Chair, if that's all right with you, just stop me and we can talk about them in more detail. Number 1 on our list is the MUS System-Wide Security Key System and Electronic Access Project. This improves campus security, safety. It's a high priority for us across the system. Worked with a smaller group of facilities directors on this to identify the dollar figure and the scope of this project. It's something that we want to be able to lock down our buildings remotely, and provide locking mechanisms to some major what we maybe unfortunately call target areas on a campus, so your larger lecture halls, etc. So that's number 1 on our list. Of course, student, faculty, staff safety is a priority for our system. Number 2 is Montana Tech replace the leaking steam lines with their new steam tunnel. It's a campus heating system. This is a critical project, $6 million. Montana Tech is having some issues with their steam lines aging and not holding or capturing the amount of heat or the percentage of heat that they generate from their steam. Third, you saw yesterday was UM Western's renovation of Block Hall. This renovation is, as you saw on the tour, it's an existing building. It's going to update obsolete classrooms and laboratory spaces. It's going to accommodate the growing science programs, bring the building up to modern life safety and air quality and code. As I go through these, it's important to remember when we look at our projects for LRBP, we have a priority list. Health and life safety is usually number one on our priority list. Major maintenance of buildings and major systems is number 2. Code compliance is number 3, and then we work our way down through major renovations, and new construction is actually last on our long-range building priority list. Next, we'll move on to U of M Missoula. This is the one of the larger projects on the list. It's $34 million, and this is new construction of a modern laboratory and active learning spaces for their core undergraduate courses in the sciences, and a co-location of the forestry and conservation programs. That's a $34 million project or ask of the legislature. Number 5 is the agriculture experiment stations. You heard a little bit about this yesterday in public comment. This constructs 5 chemistry and instrumentation research labs, 1 horticulture research and education building, and 1 multidisciplinary state wool lab. It's $11 million on the project. Number 7 would be MSU Billings. It's to construct a new facility to improve healthcare education, applied sciences, and art. And in addition to that, it's $8.9 million. There's also some money in there to demolish the failing and underside. Did I skip? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I skipped a big one. Sorry. Well, I don't know. What does it? Just trying to slide that one in under the door. Sorry about that, Madam President. Let me finish number 7, then we'll back up to number 6. So it's $8.9 million on Billings, which includes the demolition of the art annex and the vacant poly building. So back up to number 6, MSU Gallatin College at the November Regent meeting. You might remember there was a tour out to their current facilities, which are leased facilities. This item is construction of a new facility to support their growth in response to local workforce and economic demands. It is $35 million. Sorry for skipping over that. So now back down to number 8, another experiment station project. It's a construction of a new facility dedicated to the processing of plant breeders, seeds, plant and soil material collected by the scientists and agronomists and others integrated with the Montana Agriculture Experiment Stations. It's $5.6 million. And then number 9 on our capital development list is MSU Northern, the Hagener Science Center lab and classroom renovation. It upgrades that center to provide a space for the nursing and allied health programs, provides modern teaching environment, upgrades HVAC, lighting, sprinklers for code compliance. So again, that totals $124,600. That's what we're asking for capital development. We'll see how that progresses through the process. And then we've got the major repairs of $56 million. And then we have about $70 million in authority-only projects. That's the bottom of the list there. As you can see, the authority projects are typically private funding or federal funding or general spending authority. And again, we need to receive our authority from the state to proceed with the projects, even if we come up with our own funding. Of note for these projects this year, and I mentioned that in November, is the legislature now has to appropriate operations and maintenance with these projects, where previously they may have maybe delayed that. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, very helpful. Questions from the Regents? Regent Nystuen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a great list, and we see it every year, and I like it. I mean, I wish in my day job we had the same level of detail and so forth. That's something I'm working on. That's an aside. The question I have is, this is a lot with buildings and facilities and things like that. Do we have a similar type of a priority list for technology, for our computers, our systems, infrastructures, as far as, we need to do this, make these investments, but what about in our technology world? Where are we with that? Do we have a list? Do we know what those numbers are?
Please.
Madam Chair, Regent Nystuen, there certainly are lists. Those are campus-based lists. We don't have a system-wide list of IT projects and needs. But we certainly have a better connectivity between our campus IT and the systemness than we have in the past. And we do that through our shared services. efforts. John Thunstrom, our MUS Director of IT, meets back before this meeting, just like the rest of our leadership groups, with the CIOs and our planning. So, for instance, the central application. This would be a system-wide effort. So it's much, I guess, more project specific, and not kind of the list of the needs and funded at a system level. And I think that's what the difference here is that this LRBP is a specific line item funding from the legislature, so it forces us for these priorities, whereas in the IT zone, that's very much integrated into the campus's individual operating budget.
Thank you. I guess somewhere along the line, I think for me, as one regent, would be interested in seeing a little bit more granularity with regards to that as far as what our priorities are, because I just take a look at what we invest in upgrades to systems, the updates that come down the line, the antiquated systems we have, the hardware, software, the cybersecurity related things here. I know the subject here is long-range building and things like that. I guess I'd encourage a conversation and some more information on the technology side of this as well, because skip ahead a couple of generations. Are you going to be talking about buildings? Or are we going to be talking about a totally different system of delivery? And I think now is the time to have that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Nystuen. Commissioner,
I don't know if I need to add too much. Madam Chair, Regent Nystuen, yeah, I think we can do that. And there was a time actually when we had a system-wide IT proposal that we took to the legislature, so we brought a bit more of that. This is sort of legislative driven, where, like a computer fee, those are student fees, they're more campus-based. I don't really see a scenario where we'd ever move fees from one campus to another, so we haven't really brought them to a system level, but we can certainly have campuses provide, those priority lists are active on campuses. It's something they're working through all the time. We can bring more clarity to that, and I agree. As we move forward, if there is a need or an opportunity down the road that we bring things more to a system, I think we have the capability of doing that.
thank you. Any other further conversation or questions? Okay, thank you very much. And with that, I would suggest that we are done with the Budget Committee, and if you'll let Regent Tuss know that I was able to do it quickly, I would appreciate that.
Thank you, Regent Dombrowski. I think what we have next on the agenda is a break, but I think we can push forward. We've only been here for a little over an hour, so let's, before we take action on the items that we've discussed over the last day and a half, this would be a good point in the meeting to have some public comment. So we invite anyone who'd like to come to the microphone to come up and provide some public comment. Again, please state your name. And those that are watching online, you can submit your written comments to Amy Unsworth at aunsworth@montana.edu, subject line public comment, and please list your full name in that email. So, is there any public comment?
Good morning. My name is Taylor Blossom. I'm the president of the Associated Students of Montana State University. I just wanted to comment briefly on the number one priority in the proposed legislative funding priorities, the rekey of the MUS system. First of all, I just want to say I really support that priority. I think it's important for us to be improving safety and security on all our campuses. But if the board's going to list that as our number one priority, I would really encourage this group to consider having a conversation around student engagement and just making sure that we are giving our students an opportunity to engage both in their communities as well as civically, whether that's through the census, local and municipal elections, state and federal elections. I really think it's imperative for our system to ensure that we're creating an engaged and well-rounded student and promoting our students and facilitating their ability to engage civically, both with their community and through various elections, and making sure that we're consistent in how students are able to do that, having the same access to information, access to those elections as the rest of their community and throughout our system. And yeah, just would really encourage the board to have a discussion about what that engagement looks like and how we balance necessary safety concerns throughout our system with students' ability to engage civically. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. Any additional public comment? Any additional public comment? President Cruzado.
Yeah, Regent, those are members of the board. I don't know where else I wanted to make this comment, since one of my concerns is related to a consent item, and I just want to say I understand why the board needs to move in this direction, but I want to register my concern, and I think it will be negligent on my part not to. We just had a wonderful conversation about the importance of the performance-based formula. All things considered, however, the amount of dollars that we devote to the performance-based funding formula is just a fraction of the lump sum, or the equivalent of the lump sum and the allocation. You're going to vote today to change the procedures of the allocation, and I just need to say, I recognize that this is not a major change. This is how the lump sum has been allocated in the last 4 years. And even though it's characterized as a minor change, almost just from a definitive article, the primary, to a driver in the distribution of funds, I think it's important for us to receive a clear message. And just as we devote a lot of time to talk about the importance of retention, moving away from resident FTE being the main driver to being one of the considerations, it just muddies the water a little bit. 10 years ago, when I arrived at Montana State University, the situation was very different. And because of the fact that we were down in enrollment based on just 1 year, the board decided to rebase the budget, and we lost a considerable amount of money. That's when we used that's how we used to welcome presidents in the past, not by giving them new PhD proposals, and by the way, I'm very happy about that. So I say these comments with a lot of respect for all the campuses. And I say these comments with a lot of profound respect, particularly for the students and the faculty. But I am concerned that in the last 4 years, the way in which the lump sum has been allocated is moving away from resident FTE considerations. And I want to help everybody, but it's going on too long. And it will have an impact. It does have an impact already. The budget at Montana State University right now is heavily dependent on out-of-state tuition. And this last year, we crossed the line that I did not want to cross, where more than half of my students are from out-of-state students. One good day, we're going to open our eyes and find a situation that I don't want to have. And again, I say this with a profound sense of respect, but it's getting to be a little bit difficult. What I think we all need from the Regents, and that we're getting from OCHI, is absolute clarity about the importance of recruiting and retaining Montana residents. But if campuses are going to receive different allocations, irrespective of that reality, then we get confused. And if we are not here to educate more Montanans, then we need to ask ourselves, what are we here for? Again, I say these comments with a profound sense of respect, not wanting to tilt the wheel of the Regents in any way, but certainly I will be negligent in discharging my responsibilities as president if I don't bring this concern to your attention.
Thank you, Madam President. Is there any additional public comment? Any additional public comment?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Casey, I asked for 2 minutes to update the board on my lawsuit. So as of yesterday, the entire matter between Regent Sheehy and the Commissioner of Political Practices is resolved. It's been remitted to the district court. Many issues of importance to Regents have been decided. We are not state employees. We should comply with the ethics code, and there is no jurisdiction of COP over us or our meetings. Clay and I have had several discussions about this, and over the course of the 2 years that it took to litigate this, and there are some next steps that I think are really important. In establishing that COP doesn't have jurisdiction over us, we basically established that we have jurisdiction over our own ethics, and I think we need to codify what the ramifications of an ethical violation are and what we intend to do with our own jurisdiction over ourselves. So I'm going to be soliciting some comment from former Regents, current Regents, and people who are involved in the system to see what would be a good way to handle that. I think we can all agree on what the Montana Supreme Court has already decided. We've always complied with the ethics code with respect to our conflicts. Bob typically has the most conflicts of interest under the ethics code because he's a banker, and he always discloses those. Those are the types of things that we're talking about. So now that it's been established that we have our own jurisdiction, we need to establish some sort of ramification should there be a problem. So I wanted to update you on that and let you know that I'm hoping you'll have some ideas as to how we could best handle that.
Thank you, Regent Sheehy. Is there any additional public comment? President Bodder.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, I have the utmost respect for President Cruzado, and I know that we're working through this. I would also be, I think, remiss on behalf of some of the other campuses to not acknowledge that a pure resident FTE number is an important part of the picture, but also mission differentiation, what campuses are charged to do, is also an important part of the picture. So we are pushing hard on recruiting, and I can speak for, I think, other campuses as well on recruiting and retention. But it is a part, and a very important part, because FTE are up at Montana State, which is fantastic. Over the last 5 years, they're up 9%. State support is up 18% over that same time period for Montana State, which is fantastic. Total revenue is up 23%. So there is success, which is fantastic, which we should support. I also think I would be remiss in my duties of not acknowledging that there are other factors as well, with due respect.
Thank you, President Bodner. Additional public comment? All right, seeing no public comment, before we take action, let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back at 10:10 to finish up the meeting. Okay, we're at the point of the meeting. We're going to look to taking some action for each of the three committees. And again, thank you to the folks who manage the committees, all your work leading up to each of the agenda items, information items. I think it was a very productive meeting so far. So I appreciate the board chair leadership. The first item that we are going to entertain a motion on was actually in the commissioner's report. So it's not embedded in any of the committees, and this is item 187-107. It's a request for a resolution and call for election of trustees for the Community College District of the Bitterroot Valley by adopting the resolution that was attached. I will entertain a motion to approve item 187.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Dombrowski. Any discussions from members of the board? Regent Eystun.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, or Mr. Chair Lozar. What I just want to do is go on record saying that I will vote favorably for this, but this is not a blank endorsement of me, or I presume the Board of Regents, to say game on, full steam ahead, form a new community college up the Bitterroot. This is what is in that resolution, which I will support. But that's it for now.
Okay. Thank you, Regent Eystun.
More detail is, substantially more detail is absolutely needed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Regent Eystun, any other comments from the board members? Any comments from the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. One nay. Motion passes. We are going to move on to the 2-year and Community College Committee, of which we have an action item. Yay. So this morning's action for 2-year Education Community College Committee is action item A, request for approval of the Perkins 5 state plan. I will entertain a motion to approve the plan.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Rogers. Any discussion or comments from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I will call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Let's move on to action, or the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee. We've got 6 items here. We'll take action on action item A, honorary doctorate at University of Montana, the first item. I'll entertain a motion to approve this item.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Miller. Any comments from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item B, honorary doctorate, second one, University of Montana. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Sheehy. Any comments by members of the board? By the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item C, honorary doctorate, the third, University of Montana. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Dombrowski. Any comments or corrections from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item D, honorary doctorate, MSU. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Rogers. Any comments from members of the board? Any comments from the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item E, honorary doctorate, the second at MSU. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Miller. Any discussion from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to the last item in the ARSA committee, action item F, level 2 items. I will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Nystuen. Any comments from members of the board? Any comments from the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to our last committee, Budget Admin and Audit Committee. We have quite a few items in here. We will start with, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Sheehy. Any discussion or comments from members of the board? Regent Nystuen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, you know, the emeriti faculty designations that the campus has brought forward, we as the Board of Regents, I think, should acknowledge the work that's put into those, the incredible talent that resides in the group of emeriti faculty. And we know back on your respective campuses, you will have acknowledgement, celebrations, and so forth. And we wish we could be there, but if you would send our good wishes and respects and appreciation, we'd certainly appreciate that to our emeriti faculty. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent Nystuen. Any other comments or discussion from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to the action items under facility items. Action item A, request for authorization to repair streets and sidewalks, University of Montana. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Sheehy. Any discussions or comments from members of the board? Any comments from the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item B, request for authorization for renovation of corner store, University of Montana, Missoula. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Dombrowski. Any comments from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Action item C, request for authorization for structural repairs to Washington Grizzly Stadium, University of Montana, Missoula. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Miller. Any discussions or comments from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item D, request for authorization to implement elevator projects, University of Montana, Missoula. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Nystuen. Any comments from members of the board? Any comments from the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item E, request for authorization to construct a new parking and security facility, University of Montana, Missoula. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Rogers. Any discussion or comments from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Action item F, request for authorization to upgrade and repair underground lecture halls, University of Montana, Missoula. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Dombrowski. Any comments from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Action item G, request for approval to remodel Matthews Hall, University of Montana Western. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Miller. Any comments from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Action item H, request for authorization for renovations for a new nursing simulation lab, Montana Tech. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Rogers. Any discussion from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to the last item in the Budget Committee, action item I, request for authorization to issue Series G&H 2020 refunding revenue bonds, Montana State University. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Sheehy. Any discussions or comments from members of the board? From the campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the last item, action item for this meeting at University of Montana Western. Hold up.
We got 2 here, didn't we?
Yeah.
We did 2.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Remade the motion.
No, I will, yeah, we went through all the action items. We went through the committee. I'm glad the commissioner was paying attention. But I will note, we did, in the commissioners and system report, we did have discussion yesterday on an item that was to be under consideration for action today, and that was the request for approval to revise Board of Regent policy our bylaws, of which we agreed that we'd kind of go back and look at the language to see if there's some other language we can use to resolve the question around officers' expiration of their terms, et cetera. So we will entertain that at a future meeting. So with that, I want to thank all of you for coming to University of Montana Western. And as Regent Nystuen always says in these meetings, thank the campuses for all of your hard work in preparing for these meetings, preparing for each one of the agenda items that we discuss, the information items that we discuss. Certainly gratitude to Commissioner and his staff for preparation for this meeting, a very successful meeting. Before I hand it over to Chancellor Weatherby for the final words, I just want to wish everybody a safe travel back to your community. Chancellor.
Thank you. It's really been an honor and a pleasure to have you all here. Thank you for the kind words. We really appreciate your appreciation of our campus. And we're staying.
Ikalaka.
Yeah, my sister always says, "Don't you just love it when you like things?" And that was my sister. So we really do appreciate it. And any hospitality that you feel both here on the campus and Dillon, and any good things that you know really are the work of our community members, our incredible faculty, our incredible staff, our incredible students who do so much work as well as study on our campus. With this particular event, I want to again thank marketing and communications, IT, facilities, dining and events. They're hosting another big event on campus right now. And everyone who had a hand in this, which is most of the people on campus. So thanks, everyone. It's wonderful working with you, and it's wonderful working with all of you. Safe travels.